Okay, so it's Friday night and I've been hankering for pizza for like a week. So much so that I made my own meat sauce. And now that it's baking in the oven and I have 5 seconds to make this video because it cooks really fast, um, now I just want it so much more. So yeah, without further ado, here's the recipe for pizza dough. It's super fast, it's super great. Enjoy it and eat lots of pizza like me. Yay! Okay, bye. So let's go over what you're going to need for this recipe. It's so simple, guys, that apart from your measuring cups and measuring spoons, all you really need to make this dough is a mixing bowl, something to mix your dough with, whether it's your hand or a fork. Actually, forks work really great, and now I'm wondering why I used a wooden spoon. Just something to mix your mixture up with. You're also going to need somewhere to knead your dough. I've used my cutting board. You can use a clean work surface and something to bake it on, whether it's a fancy pizza stone, a cylindrical baking pan, or just a regular baking sheet. I mean, it's pizza, guys. It's not hard. You're also going to need ingredients. You're going to need a cup and a quarter of warm water, a teaspoon of yeast, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of sugar, 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour. You can see that I've used the candy thermometer to check the temperature, but it's really not necessary, guys. So long as it neither feels cold nor warm to your hand, it just feels like, I don't know, body temperature, you're absolutely fine. You're trying to go for a range of anywhere from 90 degrees to 110. So I'm dissolving the sugar into the water before adding the yeast. That way, once the yeast is fully hydrated, you can just set it to the side and not worry about it anymore. So this step is going to take anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how warm your kitchen is. If it's a warmer day, it may only take 5 minutes to get nice and bubbly. If it's a cooler day, it may take you 10. If nothing has happened after 10, 15 minutes, your yeast is probably dead and you should just throw that water mixture out and start with some new fresh yeast. So I sped up the video so that you could see kind of what the bubbles end up looking like at the end. They get nice and big and frothy, which is exactly what you're looking for. But before we add this to our flour mixture, you want to mix the salt in. And the reason why is because if you put a big, large mound of salt, which is a yeast killer or retardant, and then you put a big slurry of yeast water into the bowl, that yeast is going to come in direct contact with the salt and not help your pizza get nice and fluffy, which you need when it goes in the oven and gets nice and crusty and delicious. So you really want to mix that salt into the flour itself first. So now that we've got all that bubble action going on, which is deliciousness, you're going to mix that salt into the flour until it's nice and incorporated, and then you can add your olive oil and your yeast water and stir it to combine it. And once this is completely combined into kind of like a slaggy dough, as best I can describe it, that's when you can start kneading it onto the surface, your surface of choice, whether it's your countertop or your cutting board. And technically, you could knead this whole dough in the mixture, in the mixing bowl itself, but I find it's a lot easier to knead this dough as voraciously as you need to. Knead. If you do it on a work surface. And you'll see why I say that in a minute, because to really work this dough and not be kneading it for 30 minutes, you need full contact with it. So you can see I'm scraping the sides with the mixing spoon, my wooden spoon, but that's just so I can get all that flour incorporated and I don't have to clean my bowl later when I set the dough back in to proofing it. So at this point, you really can turn it over. It's not completely dry and it's not completely wet. It's just a little slaggy and stringy. And that's okay because you can pretty much push it all together with your hands and it'll form kind of a dough ball. So you're going to work this on your surface. Much like all the other kneading that we've done, you can push it with the palm of your hand and stretch, fold it back, and then keep quarter turning it. Or you can do a different method, which I'm about to show you, where you kind of roll it on itself, putting nice deep pressure on it to one corner, and then roll it in the opposite direction. So you're really working the gluten strands in one axis and then turning 95 degrees and working the other one. It sounds really weird, but you're about to see what I'm talking about. So now that I've got all my ingredients on the cutting board, I can really start to get at this. And guys, once you start this process, set a timer and just go for it. It's 10 minutes of kneading, and trust me, if you do 10 minutes of kneading nice and firmly, it will be perfect and pillowy by the end. And I like to incorporate all these little slaggy crumbs now because it's going to be a lot more difficult to incorporate them once your dough is nice and smooth on its surface, because those little bits weren't worked as well as the rest of the dough, if that makes any sense. That's why I'm putting all this work into kind of really forcing it into the dough. And it's really not hard at this point because it's still sticky. So we're going to work it until it's practically not sticky anymore. You could essentially run a piece of paper on it and it won't stick. So that's what I was talking about, rolling it to one corner and then across to the other corner. And that really works and stretches it on two different axes, on the x-axis and the y-axis. But you can also do this push away with the heel of your hand and fold as well. Either way works. So long as you get this end product after 10 minutes of working the dough, you're pretty much in good shape, guys. So like I said, you want it to look nice and smooth. You want it to feel nice and pillowy to the touch. You want it to spring back when you touch it. If it does not look like this, guys, it is not ready. Keep kneading it. And the more you work it angrily at the beginning, the less time it's going to take you. When I've been real angry, guys, I'm not going to lie, I got pretty much there in 8 minutes. So now that our dough is ready, you can set it in the bowl. And I like to take just a little bit of olive oil. It makes it infinitely easier to take it out of the bowl later. But really, it doesn't take much. You see that I didn't even put a full teaspoon's worth of olive oil in. It's just to kind of coat it on the outside. You don't want to drown it like I did in my other recipe. Yeah, and then you can cover this with a wet tea towel, or you can cover it with some saran wrap, and you're going to leave it on your counter for about an hour. You can also put this in the refrigerator after about 20 minutes on the counter, and if you proof it for 24 to 48 hours in your fridge, you're just going to develop more richness of flavor, and you can get a really delicious crust flavor to it. But not everybody wants to wait 2 days for pizza, and I totally understand. So it'll be perfectly ready for you so long as you rest it an hour. So yeah, I set this out on the counter and you'll see that it'll double in size in an hour and get nice and big and pillowy and super exciting. And this is a perfect opportunity to clean your kitchen, take care of your kids, make sure they're not driving each other crazy because they're all stuck at home together. You know, the basics. So now that our dough is pillowy and delicious, we can pop it out and cut it to size. Now this recipe that I've made makes 2 medium to large size pizzas. If you stretch it out nice and thin. If you want a thicker crust, it'll definitely make 2 medium-sized pizzas, but I think it might be too doughy if you tried to make 3 small pizzas. I don't know. Everybody's tastes are different, and experiment. It's not like it's a hard recipe. You can try this multiple times. Everybody loves pizza, right? So now that I've punched out all the air from the proof, and let me tell you, guys, that's better than making slime. Try this at home. Your kids will love you for letting them get physical with their dinner. So now that we've reformed our ball real quick, we can cut it to size. I've cut it ever so slightly off the bias, which means not quite in the middle, but that's because I wanted to make one slightly thicker crust that's a little bit smaller and one big one with a really, really thin crust. So that's why I've cut them slightly weirdly. But again, do whatever you want to do. And then I reform them into a ball and I let them rest for 1 more hour. And on this rest, we want to flour our work surface and flour the top of our dough and then cover it with saran wrap. You can also cover it with a dry tea towel, but I mean, it's entirely up to you what you want to get flour on. I don't like getting flour on my tea towels. I'm just weird about that. But again, it's entirely up to you. So you're going to set that underneath, and at that point, all we have to do is stretch it into its size and put it in the oven. Yay! So I haven't actually talked about your oven setup. The problem is pizza needs a really, really hot oven, and most of our ovens don't get above 500 degrees. So the way you can finagle that a little bit is to set your oven at the highest temperature it'll possibly go, and then put a heat conductor at the bottom so that when you put your pizza on top of that, it'll cook the crust even faster and give it that store-bought crackle to the crust, but still have that nice pillowy on the inside mouthfeel to it. That's as best as I can describe it. So start this process now, guys. It's gonna take you 45 minutes to even an hour to really get that oven roiling hot. So start it now as the dough is proofing, and you won't regret it later. So our dough has risen for an hour. Our oven is hot. We've assembled all our toppings that we want to put on it. So now all you have to do is stretch out the dough. And it may seem super daunting, but it's really not. There's essentially only 2 techniques. You stretch it on the surface in between your 2 hands, essentially stretching one hand away from the other, or you pick it up and use gravity against its will. So I'm going to show you the first technique. And the way you do that is by slightly turning it as you're stretching it. And you're going to stretch it left hand away from the right hand as you turn, gently stretching the outside away from the middle. So you're going to kind of end up with this little hump in the middle of your dough, and you really want to keep that as long as possible, just because it's so easy to stretch the middle of the dough so thin that you end up with this really big outside and almost nothing on the inside to hold your ingredients in. But I mean, to each their own. The other technique that you can use is by picking your dough straight up in the air like I'm doing now and just pulling it against its own weight as it hangs and dangles there, and then keep turning. And then the last way is by putting it on top of your knuckles. Now, I tend to curve my fingernails in because I have nails and I don't want them to puncture accidentally the dough. But once you kind of create that little hook hand, then you can really turn as you kind of gently toss it in the air, and it'll just spin on itself. And centrifugal force is amazing at really stretching dough out. So try it at home, play around, see which ones you like the most. Nobody's perfect the first time they do it, but it's super fun to try, guys. It's pizza. Who's not having fun with pizza? Or maybe you can double this recipe and let your kids go to town trying to stick it onto your ceiling. Who knows? But yeah, once it's completely stretched out like that, you're going to grab whatever baking sheet that you're baking it on, or peel if you're extra fancy like that. And you're just going to sprinkle it with semolina or cornmeal or flour. Really, this is just so that the pizza doesn't stick and adhere to this baking sheet. The last thing you need is to be scraping pizza off whatever it baked on. So at this point, all you have to do is stretch it on the baking sheet and put whatever your favorite toppings are. I like to keep my pizzas simple with just a little bit of meat sauce and cheese, but really, pizzas are varied and so are people's tastes in pizza. I would actually love to see what you guys are trying and experimenting with. So definitely comment down below and tell me what your favorite pizza topping combinations are. And once it's ready, it doesn't take very long in the oven. It all depends on the size of it, so I would watch it as you go, but 5-10 minutes, that's all it takes. And then it's ready to serve. I mean, because of the semolina flour, it slides right off that baking sheet. And I mean slides off of it. And it comes out nice and golden on the crust, and you really kind of want to look for that browned, really melty cheese on top. Oh, it's so yummy. I'm gonna have to stop talking about my pizza. But it cuts great, it tastes great. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and you enjoy eating with your families. Stay safe, have fun. And thanks for watching, guys. I know you guys could probably be doing other things, but it means a lot to me that you guys actually care and want to learn how to do something new and fun. So yay! Bye!